an unexpected invitation to a forgotten mansion. Lydia Hartley thought she was stepping into a world of secrets, but nothing could prepare her for the truth she would uncover. Why would someone summon her to Windcrest Manor, a place tied to a mysterious past? And when the voice of her dead father echoes through the halls, urging her to unravel a long-buried curse, Lydia realizes she's not just uncovering family secrets, she's confronting a darkness that has haunted her bloodline for generations. Lydia Hartley gazed out of her small apartment window, the vibrant cityscape a dull blur against the monotony of her life. The evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across her cluttered living room. Each day felt the same, an endless loop of quiet solitude. But tonight, something was different. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Lydia wasn't expecting anyone. Her friends were few, and they rarely visited unannounced. She hesitated, a flicker of unease tightening in her chest as she crossed the room. Opening the door, she found no one there, just a single envelope resting on her worn welcome mat. The envelope was thick, made of fine, ivory-colored paper, with her name written in an elegant script, Lydia Hartley. Curiosity piqued, she closed the door and examined the envelope. No return address, no postage, just her name. Inside, she found a piece of stationery with a message in the same flowing handwriting: "You are cordially invited to Windcrest Manor. Your presence is requested at 8 p.m. Come alone." The name Windcrest Manor tugged at something deep within her, a distant memory she couldn't quite grasp. She stood frozen in the middle of her apartment, the note clutched in her hand. The invitation felt like a lifeline thrown into the stagnant waters of her life, yet it carried an undeniable sense of foreboding. As she weighed her options, a strange pull towards the unknown made her decision. She checked the time, 6:45 p.m. If she was going to go, she needed to leave soon. With newfound purpose, Lydia changed into a simple, dark dress that seemed fitting for the occasion, whatever it might be. Her reflection in the mirror revealed calm determination, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. By 7:10 p.m., she was out the door, the invitation tucked safely in her purse. The drive took her down unfamiliar streets, the city's lights fading into the distance as she ventured into the unknown. The road narrowed, flanked by dense, shadowy woods that seemed to close in on her. The isolation was palpable, each twist and turn pulling her further from the world she knew. When Windcrest Manor finally emerged from the darkness, it was like a relic of a forgotten era, towering and imposing. The sprawling mansion was framed by overgrown gardens, the grounds wild and untamed. Lydia's heart pounded as she parked her car near the entrance. The manor loomed over her as she stepped out, its dark windows reflecting the pale moonlight. She hesitated at the front door, a heavy brass knocker in her hand. Before she could use it, the door creaked open on its own, revealing a grand foyer lit by flickering candlelight. She stepped inside, the door closing silently behind her. The cool air carried the scent of old wood and something faintly floral, like the memory of a long-forgotten garden. The foyer opened into a long hallway, its walls lined with portraits of stern, watchful faces. At the end of the hallway, a man appeared, a tall, thin figure dressed in a formal black suit. His hair was silver, his expression unreadable. "Miss Hartley, I presume?" His voice was low, each word deliberate. "Yes," Lydia replied, her voice barely a whisper in the vast space. "Welcome to Windcrest Manor. I am Mr. Collins, the butler. Please, follow me." Mr. Collins led her to a drawing room dominated by a grand fireplace. A single chair was positioned before the hearth, beside a small table that held an old-fashioned telephone and a crystal decanter. "Please, have a seat," Mr. Collins gestured to the chair, his tone polite but distant. Lydia sat, the plush velvet cushion yielding beneath her. Mr. Collins nodded and left the room, leaving Lydia alone with her thoughts. As she stared into the fire, trying to make sense of the situation, the phone on the table rang. The sudden sound shattered the silence, and Lydia jumped. She hesitated, then picked up the receiver. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was her father's voice, clear, calm, and impossibly real. "Lydia," he said softly, sending a chill down her spine. But her father had been dead for 5 years. Lydia's fingers tightened around the receiver, her breath caught in her throat. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, her father's voice, as clear and steady as it had been when he was alive. The shock of hearing him again, after 5 long years, left her reeling. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Lydia," the voice repeated, gentle and familiar, yet tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "You're safe. I need you to listen carefully." Her heart pounded, the sound of it almost drowning out his words. This couldn't be real. Her father had passed away after a long illness, leaving a void that had never truly healed. And yet, here he was, speaking to her as if time hadn't stolen him away. "How is this possible?" she finally managed to ask, her mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. "There's no time to explain," he said, his tone firm yet caring. "Windcrest Manor holds the answers, but it also holds dangers. You have to trust me, Lydia. I'm here to help you." A part of her wanted to believe, to embrace the comfort of hearing his voice again, but the rational part of her mind screamed that this was wrong, unnatural. Her father was gone, and whatever this was, it couldn't be him. Could it? "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "There are things you don't know, things I never had the chance to tell you," the voice replied, an edge of regret creeping in. "Secrets that were kept to protect you, but now you need to uncover them. They're hidden within the walls of this manor." The room seemed to close in around her, the warm glow of the fire now casting ominous shadows. Her father's voice was a lifeline, pulling her deeper into a world she didn't understand, but one she couldn't turn away from. "But how is this happening?" Lydia's voice was barely more than a whisper. You're gone." A pause followed, the silence thick with unspoken words. When her father spoke again, his voice was softer, filled with a sadness she hadn't heard before. "I know, sweetheart. And I'm sorry. But this is the only way I can reach you. I can't explain how or why, but you have to believe me. You must find the box on the mantel. It will guide you." Lydia's gaze shifted to the fireplace, where a small, ornate box sat atop the mantel, bathed in the warm light of the flames. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to beckon her. "What's in it?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Open it," he urged gently. "You'll find the first clue inside. But remember, Lydia, not everyone in Windcrest Manor is what they seem. You must be careful." His words sent a chill down her spine, but before she could ask more, the line went dead. The sudden silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the warmth that had filled her heart just moments before. Slowly, Lydia replaced the receiver, her hand lingering on it as if hoping to hear his voice again. But the silence remained, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the mysterious box. Taking a deep breath, she crossed the room and lifted the lid of the box. Inside, she found a bundle of old letters tied with a faded ribbon, a small brass key, and a photograph. The sight of the photograph made her breath catch in her throat. It was a black and white image of a woman standing in front of Windcrest Manor, her features strikingly similar to Lydia's own. She turned the photograph over, her heart racing. In neat cursive, the back of the photo read, "Margaret Hartley, 1938. Lydia's mind reeled. Who was Margaret Hartley, and why did she look so much like Lydia? The name Hartley was unmistakable, a direct connection to her own family. But she had never heard of this woman before. Her fingers traced the outline of the name, her thoughts swirling with questions. What secrets had her family kept hidden? And why was she only learning about them now? As she placed the photograph back in the box, a soft knock echoed through the room, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up, startled. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Setting the letters aside, Lydia rose from the chair, her heart pounding. The knock was coming from the large wooden doors at the far end of the drawing room, the ones she hadn't noticed when she first entered. She hesitated, then steeled herself and crossed the room. Her hand hovered over the brass handle as the knock came a third time, softer now, almost a whisper of sound. With a deep breath, Lydia grasped the handle and pulled the door open. Standing in the doorway was a woman, her face partially obscured by the dim light. She was tall, with dark hair pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a simple, yet elegant dress that seemed to belong to another time. Her eyes, a deep, piercing blue, met Lydia's with an intensity that made her take a step back. "Miss Hartley?" the woman asked, her voice smooth and measured, yet carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "Yes," Lydia replied, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. The woman stepped forward, into the light, revealing more of her face. There was something familiar about her, though Lydia couldn't quite place it. "My name is Evelyn," the woman said, her gaze never leaving Lydia's. "I believe we have much to discuss." The name Evelyn hung in the air between them, resonating with a familiarity that Lydia couldn't quite place. The woman standing before her seemed ageless, her presence both comforting and unsettling. Lydia's mind raced, trying to connect this Evelyn with the letter she had just discovered. "Evelyn," Lydia repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "You're the one who wrote to Margaret, aren't you?" Evelyn's gaze softened, a flicker of something unspoken passing across her features. "Yes," she said simply. "I wrote those letters many years ago, hoping they would one day find their way to you." The confirmation sent a shiver down Lydia's spine. This woman wasn't just connected to her family's past, she was a living part of it. But how could that be? Evelyn should be much older, perhaps even gone by now. Yet here she stood, no older than Lydia herself. "What do you mean, find their way to me?" Lydia asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the implications. "How do you know who I am?" Evelyn stepped closer, her movements deliberate and graceful. "Because I've been waiting for you, Lydia. Waiting for the day when you would come here, to Windcrest Manor, and finally uncover the truth that was kept from you." "The truth?" Lydia echoed, frustration bubbling beneath her confusion. "I don't understand any of this. My father, he's the one who sent me here, or at least his voice did. But he's gone. And now you're telling me that you've been waiting for me? For how long? Why now?" Evelyn's expression was sympathetic yet firm. "All in good time, Lydia. But first, there are things you must know, about your family, about the legacy that's been passed down to you, and about the secrets that lie within these walls." Lydia's eyes narrowed, a mix of wariness and desperation for answers in her gaze. "You keep talking about secrets. But all I've found so far are fragments, a photograph, some letters, a voice on the phone. If you know so much, then tell me. Tell me what's really going on." Evelyn hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of revealing too much too soon. Then she nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Very well. But understand this, Lydia, what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about your family." Lydia swallowed hard, bracing herself. "I'm ready." Evelyn gestured to the chair by the fire. "Please, sit. This is not a story to be told standing on cold floors." Lydia reluctantly returned to the chair, her eyes never leaving Evelyn as she did so. Once she was seated, Evelyn took a chair opposite her, folding her hands neatly in her lap as she began to speak. "Your family, the Hartleys, have owned Windcrest Manor for generations," Evelyn started, her voice steady and measured. "But the estate is more than just a home. It's a place where the past lingers, where the choices of those who came before us still echo in the present." Lydia's fingers gripped the armrests, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" "Your ancestor, Margaret Hartley, was my closest friend," Evelyn continued, her eyes distant as if she were seeing the past unfold before her. "We were like sisters, bound not by blood, but by the secrets we kept. You see, Windcrest Manor was a refuge for us, a place where we could hide from the world and from the pain that haunted us." Lydia listened intently, her mind trying to reconcile the image of the melancholy woman in the photograph with the story Evelyn was telling. "What happened to Margaret?" Evelyn's gaze dropped to the floor, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Margaret was a woman who loved deeply, but she was betrayed by those she trusted most, her own family. There was a scandal, something that would have destroyed the Hartley name if it had come to light. Margaret's parents, your great-grandparents, forced her into seclusion here at Windcrest, away from prying eyes. Lydia felt a pang of sympathy for the woman in the photograph, her own flesh and blood, who had been locked away in this mansion, her life hidden from the world. What was the scandal? Evelyn looked up, her eyes meeting Lydia's with a penetrating gaze. Margaret fell in love with a man she was forbidden to be with, someone her family deemed unsuitable. When they discovered her relationship, they sought to erase it from history, to bury it along with Margaret herself. But Margaret was strong, stronger than they knew. She refused to be silenced, and in her defiance, she paid the ultimate price. The weight of Evelyn's words settled heavily on Lydia. What happened to her? She took her own life, Evelyn said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Right here, in Windcrest Manor. Her death was covered up, made to look like an accident. But I knew the truth. I was the only one who knew. Lydia's breath caught in her throat. The image of the woman in the photograph, so full of sorrow, so resigned, suddenly made sense in a way that was both heartbreaking and horrifying. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you tell the truth? Evelyn's expression hardened, a flicker of old pain flashing in her eyes. I tried, but no one would listen. The Hartleys were powerful, their influence far-reaching. They silenced anyone who dared to question the official story. And so, I waited, biding my time, keeping the letters and the photograph safe, hoping that one day, someone like you would come along, someone who could finally set things right. Lydia felt a mix of anger and sorrow welling up inside her. The tragedy of Margaret's life, the injustice done to her, was almost too much to bear. But why now? Why after all these years? Because the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how deeply it's buried, Evelyn replied, her voice resolute. And because your father, before he passed, uncovered the truth himself. He realized that you needed to know, that you were the key to bringing peace to this house and to Margaret's memory. Lydia's thoughts whirled, trying to piece together the fragments of her family's history that Evelyn had laid before her. But how do I do that? What am I supposed to do? Evelyn reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small, delicate locket on a chain, holding it out to Lydia. This was Margaret's. It's more than just a piece of jewelry, it's a key, a symbol of the love she tried to protect. Take it. You'll need it to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. Lydia took the locket with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it in her palm. The metal was cool, but it seemed to hum with an energy, as if it were alive with the memories it carried. Go to the East Wing, Evelyn instructed, her voice gentle but firm. There's a room there that's been sealed off for decades. The key you found in the box will open the door. Inside, you'll find what you need to bring Margaret's story to light. Lydia nodded, her resolve hardening as she realized what she had to do. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. I'll find the truth. Evelyn gave her a small, sad smile. Thank you, Lydia. I knew you would. With that, Evelyn rose from her chair and moved toward the door, her steps silent on the carpet. Lydia watched her go, feeling a strange mix of emotions, fear, determination, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. She had come to Windcrest Manor seeking answers, and now she had a mission, a purpose that she couldn't turn away from. As Evelyn disappeared into the shadows of the hallway, Lydia looked down at the locket in her hand, the firelight reflecting off its polished surface. Whatever lay ahead in the East Wing, she knew it would be the key to unlocking the full truth of her family's past. And with that truth, she hoped, would come the peace that Margaret Hartley, and perhaps even her father, had been denied for so long. Lydia stood alone in the drawing room, the locket Evelyn had given her warm in her hand, as if it had absorbed the heat of the fire. The small, delicate object seemed to pulse with the weight of its history, its significance. It was a key, not just to the physical door in the East Wing, but to the deeper, more painful truths buried within Windcrest Manor. The manor was silent around her, as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for her next move. Lydia slipped the locket into her pocket and made her way out of the drawing room, her footsteps echoing faintly in the long corridor. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced across the walls, making the portraits of long-dead Hartleys appear almost alive, their eyes following her as she passed. As she walked, Lydia's thoughts swirled with the weight of the revelations she had just learned. Margaret Hartley's life had been a tragic one, filled with love and betrayal, and now it was up to Lydia to uncover the full truth. The responsibility felt heavy, almost too much to bear, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning through the manor like a labyrinth. Lydia passed room after room, each one dark and silent, until she finally reached the door to the east wing. The door was old, the wood worn and faded, and it had the air of something that had not been disturbed for years. Dust coated the handle, and the hinges creaked as Lydia pushed it open. The east wing was colder than the rest of the house, the air damp and thick with the scent of age. Lydia shivered as she stepped inside, her breath clouding in the dim light. The walls here were lined with more portraits, but these were different, faded, almost ghostly, as though time had tried to erase them. She moved through the wing slowly, her eyes scanning the doors that lined the hallway. Each one seemed more foreboding than the last, their dark wood hiding secrets that she wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. But Evelyn's words echoed in her mind, "There's a room that's been sealed off for decades." Lydia's steps faltered as she approached the end of the hallway. The door before her was different from the others, larger, more ornate, with intricate carvings that hinted at its significance. The keyhole was old and worn, the brass tarnished with age. With a deep breath, Lydia pulled the small brass key from her pocket and inserted it into the lock. The key turned with a soft click, the sound reverberating through the silent hallway. Lydia hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the door handle, before pushing it open. The room beyond was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the hallway behind her. Lydia reached for a candle on a nearby table, lighting it with trembling hands. The flame cast a small circle of light, just enough for Lydia to make out the outlines of the room. It was a bedroom, but it felt more like a tomb. The air was heavy, almost oppressive, and the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust. The bed, with its ornate headboard and faded linens, stood against the far wall, untouched by time. A large, antique wardrobe loomed in one corner, its doors slightly ajar as if someone had left in a hurry. Lydia moved deeper into the room, the candlelight revealing more details as she went. There was a dressing table by the window, its mirror cracked and tarnished. A few personal items were scattered across the surface, an old brush, a silver hairpin, a small, empty perfume bottle. Everything was coated in dust, as though the room had been frozen in time, forgotten by the world outside. She approached the bed, the candle casting long shadows across the floor. As she reached the foot of the bed, Lydia noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There was a letter lying on the pillow, the paper yellowed with age but still intact. It was addressed simply to Margaret. With trembling hands, Lydia picked up the letter and carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant, almost familiar, and as she began to read, she felt a chill run down her spine. "My dearest Margaret," the letter began, "I have loved you from the moment I first laid eyes on you. My love for you has been the only constant in my life, the one thing that has given me hope in a world that has been so cruel to us both." The words were filled with raw emotion, a deep, abiding love that seemed to leap off the page. Lydia's heart ached as she read on, feeling the weight of the writer's sorrow and longing. "But I fear our time together is running out. Your family's hatred for me, for what we share, has become too much to bear. I cannot stand to see you suffer because of me, and I cannot endure the thought of living in a world without you." The letter went on to describe the agony of their separation, the unbearable pain of being torn apart by forces beyond their control. The writer spoke of a plan, a desperate escape that would allow them to be together, free from the oppression of the Hartley family. But the plan was risky, fraught with danger, and the writer feared it might fail. "If you find this letter, it means I was too late. It means that our love was not enough to overcome the darkness that surrounds us. But know this, my dearest Margaret, my love for you will never die. It will live on in this house, in these walls, and in the hearts of those who come after us. Lydia's hands shook as she finished the letter, the tears in her eyes blurring the words. The writer's anguish was palpable, their love for Margaret a shining beacon in the gloom of Windcrest Manor's history. But the letter ended abruptly, with no signature, no final words of farewell. It was as though the writer had been interrupted, their last thoughts left unfinished, lost to the passage of time. Lydia carefully folded the letter and placed it back on the pillow, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had just read. This room, this letter, it was a testament to the love that had been buried here, a love that had defied the hatred and prejudice of the Hartley family. But as she looked around the room, Lydia felt a deep sense of unease. The love that had once filled this space had been twisted into something dark, something that had consumed Margaret and left its mark on Windcrest Manor. She turned her attention to the wardrobe in the corner, its doors still ajar. There was something about it that drew her in, something that whispered of secrets yet to be uncovered. Lydia moved toward it, the candlelight flickering as she reached for the handle. The wardrobe doors creaked open, revealing a collection of old clothes, faded and moth-eaten, hanging limply on their hangers. But it was the small, wooden box on the floor of the wardrobe that caught Lydia's eye. It was simple, unadorned, but it felt significant, as though it held the final piece of the puzzle. Lydia knelt down and opened the box, her breath catching as she saw what was inside. It was another letter, but this one was different. The paper was crisp, the ink fresh, as though it had been written only recently. With trembling hands, Lydia unfolded the letter and began to read. The handwriting was elegant, just like the first, but the words were different, colder, more detached. Lydia, the letter began, asterisk if you are reading this, then you have come further than I ever expected. You have uncovered the secrets of this house, but there is one more truth you must face. The love that brought you here is not what it seems. It is a curse, a darkness that has haunted our family for generations. And now, it is your burden to bear, asterisk. Lydia's heart pounded as she read the final words of the letter, her mind struggling to comprehend what it all meant. The love story that had brought her to Windcrest Manor was not just a tragic romance, it was something more, something darker that had entwined itself with her family's history. And now, Lydia realized, it was up to her to confront it, to finally bring an end to the darkness that had consumed her ancestors. The words of the letter echoed in Lydia's mind as she stood in the cold, dim room, the weight of the past pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. The love that brought you here is not what it seems. It is a curse. The revelation felt like a blow, shattering the romantic tragedy she had been piecing together and replacing it with something far more sinister. She placed the letter back into the wooden box, her hands trembling. The room around her seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if the very walls were alive with the memories of those who had suffered here. Lydia felt the weight of those who had come before her, Margaret, Evelyn, and now herself, all caught in the web of secrets that Windcrest Manor had spun over the decades. Taking a deep breath, Lydia stood and turned to face the bed where Margaret had once laid her head, where the letter she had found only moments before had been carefully placed, waiting for someone, waiting for her. The bed now seemed less like a piece of furniture and more like an altar, a shrine to a love that had turned into a curse. She knew what she had to do. The truth, whatever it was hidden somewhere within this room. And if there was any hope of freeing her family from the darkness that had taken root here, she had to find it. Lydia walked slowly to the center of the room, feeling the chill of the floorboards seeping through the thin soles of her shoes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket Evelyn had given her. It was small, delicate, and felt strangely warm to the touch. The locket, with its intricate design and polished surface, seemed to pulse in her hand, almost as if it were alive. Her fingers found the tiny clasp, and with a soft click, she opened it. Inside, instead of a photograph or a lock of hair as she might have expected, there was a small, folded piece of paper. Lydia carefully unfolded it, her heart pounding with anticipation. The paper was old, yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear and precise. It was another letter, this one much shorter, written in the same elegant hand as the others. Lydia, if you found this, then you're closer to the truth than anyone has ever been. The curse that haunts this family is tied to the love that Margaret and I shared. It was a love so strong, so defiant, that it defied even death. But in doing so, it became something dark, something twisted. The only way to end it is to confront the source. Look beneath the bed. You'll find what you need there. Lydia's breath caught in her throat as she read the words. The idea that the love between Margaret and her mysterious lover could have transformed into something so malevolent was almost too much to bear. But she knew she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far, and the answers she sought were within reach. With a sense of trepidation, Lydia knelt beside the bed, the candlelight casting eerie shadows on the floor. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage, before reaching underneath the bed frame. Her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a box, much like the one in the wardrobe, but larger and heavier. She pulled it out slowly, the sound of wood scraping against wood echoing in the stillness of the room. The box was old, its surface marred with scratches and dents, but it was intact. Lydia set it down in front of her and carefully opened the lid. Inside, she found a collection of objects that seemed to tell the final chapter of the story she had been uncovering: a small, weathered book bound in leather, a lock of dark hair tied with a red ribbon, and a photograph of Margaret and a man Lydia didn't recognize. The man's face was stern, yet there was a softness in his eyes as he looked at Margaret, a tenderness that belied the stoic expression. Lydia picked up the book, her hands shaking slightly. She opened it to the first page and saw that it was a journal, the handwriting unmistakably Margaret's. The entries were dated from the last months of her life, and as Lydia began to read, the full weight of the truth began to settle over her. Margaret had been in love with this man, a man named Henry, who had been forbidden to her by her family. Their love was passionate, all-consuming, and ultimately destructive. The journal entries spoke of secret meetings, whispered promises, and a growing sense of despair as they realized that they could never truly be together. But it wasn't just the societal barriers that kept them apart, it was something darker, something supernatural. According to the journal, Margaret and Henry had found a way to be together beyond death. They had performed a ritual, something ancient and forbidden, to bind their souls together. But the ritual had gone wrong. Instead of uniting them in eternal love, it had cursed them both, and their descendants. The final entry in the journal was written in a shaky hand, the words barely legible: "I fear what we have done. The love that once brought me so much joy has turned into a prison, a darkness that I cannot escape. I hear him, calling to me from the shadows, but it is not the Henry the first loved. It is something else, something terrible. If anyone finds this, know that our love was real, but it has become something monstrous. Please, forgive me." Lydia's hands trembled as she closed the journal. The truth was almost too terrible to comprehend. The love that had driven Margaret and Henry to defy their families, to defy death itself, had become twisted into a curse that had haunted the Hartley family ever since. She placed the journal back in the box, her mind reeling. How could she possibly break this curse, this darkness that had taken root in her family's history? The answer, she realized, lay not in fighting the darkness, but in understanding it, in acknowledging the love that had turned into something monstrous and finding a way to release it. Lydia took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She knew what she had to do. She had to return to the drawing room, to the fire that had been the only warmth in this cold, cursed house. There, she would burn the journal, the letters, and the photograph, everything that had been tainted by the curse. With the box in her arms, Lydia made her way back through the east wing, her footsteps light but purposeful. She felt the weight of the past lifting slightly as she walked, as though the spirits of Margaret and Henry were watching her, urging her on. When she reached the drawing room, she placed the box on the small table beside the fire. The flames crackled softly, their warmth a stark contrast to the chill that still clung to her. One by one, Lydia fed the contents of the box into the fire, the journal, the letters, the photograph, watching as the flames consumed them, turning the paper and ink into ash. As the last of the papers crumbled into the fire, Lydia felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. The darkness that had haunted Windcrest Manor for so long seemed to recede, as though the house itself was finally able to breathe again. She sat in the chair by the fire, the locket still warm in her hand, and allowed herself to grieve for Margaret and Henry, for the love that had turned into something terrible. But she also felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that by confronting the truth, she had begun to lift the curse that had plagued her family for generations. As the fire burned low, Lydia knew that it was time to leave Windcrest Manor. The house had held her family's secrets for far too long, but now, with the truth finally uncovered, she could walk away, leaving the past behind. She rose from the chair, the locket still clutched in her hand, and made her way to the front door. The air outside was cool, crisp, and filled with the scent of rain. Lydia took one last look at the manor, its imposing silhouette softened by the early morning light. With a deep breath, she turned and walked away, the locket hanging around her neck as a reminder of the love that had both cursed and saved her family. The darkness had been faced, the truth had been revealed, and as Lydia left Windcrest Manor behind, she carried with her the hope of a new beginning.